Good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. It is crazy Oregon news now with more electrolytes. It makes plants grow. If you know, you know. I'm Bill London. I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, streaming at kpnw.com. And tonight's news brought to you by none other than Sean Sutherland. Okay, we're at that time of year when a lot of people are trying to figure out what they're going to do for their health insurance. If you're somebody that's on Medicare, you're looking through all the plans going, what do I do? Well, maybe talking to Sean will help clarify some things for you. Maybe, you're going out there on the market and you're going through healthcare.gov and you're trying to find an individual plan and you're looking at them and saying to yourself, what do I do? Well, talk to Sean Sutherland of Ask Insurance. Sean will help you figure it out. And now for our crazy Oregon news. I've been following this so long that a new development in this thing, and it has to do with the gang from Colombia that has been targeting Asian families, not only in Washington and Oregon, but in other places in the nation. And we told you that a judge had said one of the main guys that was arrested in this case, he's not a flight risk. Yeah, you can let him go to California. Well, a federal judge in Eugene has other ideas. He ordered the suspect in the burglaries that targeted Asian American community members to maintain and remain in federal custody. 34-year-old Darenson Martinez-Grandas is one of 7 suspects accused of targeting Asian households all across Washington, in Oregon, and here locally in Eugene. The federal prosecutor argued Martinez-Grandas had both the ability and incentive to flee, and that he could be facing over 5 years in federal prison along with other charges and potentially more sentencing from the crimes that he committed in Lane County. Now, Martinez-Grandas says he didn't do anything. He was just a driver and booked their Airbnb stays. I didn't have anything to do with this. I just, I booked rooms along with my brother. Well, prosecutors say they don't believe his story or the claim that he didn't know about the burglaries that the judge himself called brazen and sophisticated. Federal court judge Michael McShane's decision is a complete reversal of Magistrate Judge Potter's ruling a couple of weeks ago that we reported to you, which initially granted Martinez bail so he could go live with his pregnant girlfriend in California. No flight risk there. At this point, there is no court date sought or set for Martinez-Grandas or the other suspects of the at least 22 burglaries that targeted Asian residents in Eugene alone just last year. Well, Governor Tina Kotek believes she has a map. After 3 years of state economic wasting, Governor Tina Kotek, who's facing re-election, unveiled her new Prosperity Roadmap for Oregon. And what it amounts to is the governor saying everything she said before. The state needs to expand housing, which it hasn't. It needs to strengthen public education, which hasn't happened. And she also wants to make sure there's more access to mental health care and addiction care. Another thing that hasn't really happened. And these are all things that her past efforts have failed to make a dent in. Most of them were a part of the promises that she made when she initially ran for governor. Now, one new wrinkle from her plan announced last week was the creation of a new bureaucracy called the Governor's Prosperity Council with a newly appointed Chief Prosperity Officer. What the hell does that even mean? Now, if she now has a prosperity roadmap, exactly what roadmap has she been using for the last 3 years as governor? and for the decade before that while she was Speaker of the Oregon House. Literally, her last 13 to 14 years, she's been in charge of doing what the state is today and got us here to this, with the highest homeless rate in the state's history, nearly the worst school system in the nation, the highest individual and nearly highest individual business taxes in the nation, out of control rent prices, and in the state's largest city, a 30+% vacancy rate downtown, and businesses fleeing the state. She was in charge of all of that. And what is this roadmap? Because she's not really saying. And while we're at it, what focus group came up with the name Prosperity Roadmap? Even worse was the focus group that came up with the name Chief Prosperity Officer. Were they like from some sort of Eastern Soviet bloc country? And can we get a copy of the Prosperity Roadmap at the checkout stand at Bimart, along with our Oregon and Washington atlases? Is there an app for this map? So, she unveiled her Prosperity Roadmap. And then what did the governor do the very next day? Well, she made another announcement. Governor Tina Kotek is running again and seeking re-election. And during her re-election announcement video, she claimed progress during her tenure, but ignored that since her election, again, homelessness is worse. Oregon schools are still among the worst. We're losing residents and businesses at an accelerating rate. Can't talk about that. For the most part, if you watch the video statement, she's running on a one-note premise. And she mentions it multiple times. And it can be boiled down to 4 words. She's against President Trump. There was no press conference about this, of course, because you don't want that pesky media to ask you what your plans are, or even ask if her Prosperity Roadmap has any direction on it other than south. So we've been talking about flock camera systems. They are what's called automatic license plate recognition devices run by AR. And the vendor for it is Flock Safety. Now, we've told you about the controversy surrounding these flock cameras in both Springfield and Eugene, with, well, a lot of different concerns by community members. So, Friday night, not during the day, but Friday night, the Eugene and Springfield police departments each announced, within about an hour of each other, that they terminated their contracts with Flock. And they cited concerns, the same concerns, over system vulnerabilities, data security, and the technology's ability to meet operational needs, whatever that means. Now, neither city announced whether they were going to seek a replacement vendor because Flock's not the only one that do this. EPD was very vague on what was going to happen to the cameras themselves, just that, well, the city's contract with Flock is now terminated. After several months of operation and pushback from citizens on being constantly surveilled and the lack of transparency by Flock, the city asked Flock to turn off the cameras in October. Okay, so the community could discuss it. Springfield police, though, said that the cameras, which they claimed had never been turned on, but were, would be covered soon and then completely removed. And at the same time, both law enforcement agencies touted the usefulness of the ALPR technology in helping solve crimes, and neither agency ruled out the possibility of using some other service. Now, if you recall, also back in October, the Lane County Sheriff's Office announced that they had signed a contract with Flock for the camera technology, but they weren't moving forward with installation of the cameras so that the public could have some sort of input. Nobody knows whether the Sheriff's Office plans to go forward with the Flock contract following the recent developments with Eugene and Springfield. All right, so all of this came out last Friday. Then another interesting tidbit came out today. A neat little piece of reporting about those flock cameras that hypothetically were turned off in October. Now, while both Springfield and Eugene police announced the severing of ties with Flock and that they had turned off the surveillance cameras in October, remember, Eugene police said, okay, we're gonna tell Flock turn these things off in October so that the community can have a discussion. Well, today, KLCC reported that Flock online data shows that Eugene's cameras were detecting over 8,000 unique vehicles in the area in the last 30 days. That is well after Eugene police told Flock to turn the cameras off and then told residents that the cameras had been disabled. They've still been on. That follows an incident as well, where a camera in November captured a suspect in Springfield after police said their cameras were never turned on. And in that case, the activated camera was called an accidental activation. They said, oh, yeah, that was just an accident. And it was just one camera. This all but makes the case that critics of Flock have said from the very beginning, and that is there is absolutely zero transparency regarding these cameras, and any assurances from Flock about their use can't be trusted. It made their case. So petitioners needed 78,000 signatures or thereabouts to repeal Governor Tina Kotek's $4.3 billion in increased taxes and fees to spend and fund the Oregon Department of Transportation. Well, petitioners have now collected over 180,000 signatures, and they say they're going to continue collecting them until at least December 20th. So question, does ODOT have a prosperity roadmap? Can they borrow one from the governor if they don't? The really big question, though, is what will Democrats do with this thing on the November ballot? Because if you think about it, it puts a huge spotlight on how Oregon's leadership and Governor Tina Kotek have no problem taxing working Oregonians to pay for what literally are their failures, either directly or failure of oversight. So do they really want this on the November ballot? No, they don't. So what could they do? Well, here's what. So we have a short legislative session that's coming up after the first of the year, and it's going to tell the tale. Democrats do not want this on the November ballot, which could potentially upend the Democrats' supermajority in the House or the Senate or both, and maybe, just maybe, cost Kotek her governorship. After all, it's her bill, and it's literally running on the same ballot she'd be running on. So during the short session, Democrats, who have a supermajority, have all the votes they need to do some different things. The first would be to go back to that bill that was passed in the special session and actually pull out all of the tax and fee increases from that bill. Every single one of them. They can pull it out. Now, if they did that, that would make, of course, the petition referendum null and void. You can't vote to end taxes and fees that don't exist. They have the ability, the power to do that. Then there's another direction they could take, and they have the power to do this too. They could change the date that the referendum goes on the ballot. They could put it on the May primary ballot as opposed to the November ballot. Now, that would give Democrats a chance to pivot away from it because you can pretty much guarantee that referendum is going to pass. All polling shows that it will. So they take their lumps in May, then they pivot and take advantage of an electorate that has about a 5-minute attention span and will forget it by the time we get to November. Now, either of those options are more likely than a third option, which is still an option, and they can still do it, which is stick to their guns. Let the referendum go to the voters in November, and then maybe claim it's a new location on the prosperity roadmap. Okay, so this comes to us from the state's capital city of Salem and a vote that was done by its city council. And this is going to give you an idea of what is Oregon really all about. So the Salem City Council voted last night 5-4 to reappoint a community police review board member. That's despite some, shall we say, recent concerns about his past. Now, the council's vote actually went against a recommendation made by the city's Boards and Commissions Appointments Committee, because they were saying, no, do not reappoint Kyle Hedquist to the police board. Just leave it open. But the issue came in front of the council, and Councilor Maya Vang made an amendment to reappoint Hedquist. She said Hedquist's positive work in the community should lead to him remaining on the board. Councilors Shane Matthew and a couple of others, who were also members of the Board and Commissions Appointment Committee, voted against that amended motion. Matthews motioned to not reappoint in the December 3rd meeting and instead open up the position. Now, he said it's written into city policy to consider criminal history and didn't like the precedent of overriding staff recommendations who were against the reappointment. Yes, this is what they call foreshadowing. So not only on the final vote did Hedquist get back on the Community Police Review Board, but they unanimously appointed him as well to some other board positions, to the Citizens Advisory Traffic Commission and the Civil Service Commission. Now, if we go back a year, Hedquist actually received all the votes necessary, every single vote, unanimously, to go on to the Community Police Review Board. And then, well, things kind of went sideways because, see, when you go on one of these boards, you're supposed to have a background check. And they didn't give him a background check before they elected him to the commission. So you might be asking, well, what did they find out? His past, namely that he's a convicted murderer whose sentence was commuted by former Governor Kate Brown in 2022. City officials said, well, they didn't do the background checks, so they didn't know that, well, Hedquist was a convicted murderer who was literally let out of prison by Governor Kate Brown, who was letting just about anybody with a sentence more than 2 years out of prison. Hedquist served 28 years in prison because in 1995, he brutally murdered a Roseburg teenage girl. Her name was Nikki Thrasher. Why did Hedquist murder her? Well, because he was afraid that the girl was going to report him to police because he was hiding stolen items in her home. That's what he killed her for. And yeah, he's on the Community Police Review Board now. What the hell could go wrong? All right, there's your crazy Oregon news, brought to you by Sean Sutherland of Ask Insurance. You have questions? Go ask John. All right, Rick, time for you to roll out your own version of Reel.